that Star Spangled Banner?
Screwed up enough, right?
Anybody hear it quite that way before? That was Madison Rising. The lead singer of that was out on his own, right? Isn't that guy that's usually on Patriot Nation?
Mom retired from, actually, she was a nurse.
Excuse me.
Jacksonville.
I can't think of his name right now. Can't think of his name, but the lead singer of that is usually on Patriot Nation, and he plays this song all the time. What we're going to bring up right now, looking at the list, I was sitting there looking at this, and I'm going, Charles Love. American Threat, Cultural Decline. Oh, man, this sounds familiar as far as the name. Then he come up and just introduced himself. He's been on my radio broadcast. It's like, wow, it's good to meet people in person, you know, that have been on my radio broadcast, that are standing up, speaking out, and getting involved. So everybody welcome Charles Love, American Threat, Cultural Decline. Yes, sir, you're up now. Where? I don't see it. Excuse me, sorry, there's no... Oh, sorry, we skipped to get Aaron on here. I apologize. Yeah, get your stuff, you'll be up next after this individual. That's what happens when you flip, you know, from one to another and change the... Okay, well, I apologize. I apologize. Charles Love will be on next. What we're going to do now is free market economics with Loren Spivack. Now, did I pronounce that right? Loren Spivack, free market economics. I think you're a Trump fan, aren't you? Trump? Pleasure to meet you.
Well, how you guys doing? My name is Loren Spivack, and I go by the nickname the Free Market Warrior because I travel the country and speak to conservative groups and Republican groups about free market economics, which I think is incredibly important in an age where all you have to do to win a Democratic primary is say I'm in favor of socialism and everything will be free. And the Democrats say everything will be free, and that's it, and you win the primary because they're like, no one ever thought of this before. And an age where the former president is running around telling everyone that 10 years ago he put a secret formula into the economy that would cause it to move very, very slowly for the next 10 years. And then 10 years later, 2 years after he left office, suddenly it would bloom into life and we'd have amazing economic growth, and this was all caused by Obama back in 2009. So if you don't want people to believe stuff like this, you ought to be talking and learning about economics and how it works. I think the other thing that I find myself talking about more and more lately, however, is the left. I think it's important that we understand what the left is and what it's about. And the first thing that you need to understand if you want to understand the left is that they have no principles at all. And I want to be very clear about this. I'm not saying they have different principles than my principles. I'm saying they have no principles, none. Okay? Because the word principle actually means something. It refers to something that's true all the time for everybody in every circumstance. That's what a principle is. So for example, for me, free speech is a principle. You would never catch me suggesting that anybody with any opinion whatsoever should ever, under any circumstances, be prevented from expressing that opinion. There is no opinion in the entire universe so horrible that it is not covered by freedom of speech because it's a principle. Okay? And a lot of younger conservatives today are surprised to learn that the modern left that produced, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, the whole modern left got its start in the 1960s on college campuses as a free speech movement. That was the original left-wing movement, was they wanted to have free speech on the campuses, and that's what they fought for. And this stuck around. You see traces of it going into the early 80s, and then it disappeared. And now there's anything but free speech on the college campuses. They're trying to shut up everyone they can possibly figure out how to shut up. Well, what happened? Is the left in favor of free speech, or are they against free speech? And the answer is neither, or both. If it's their speech, they're in favor of it. Okay? If it's not their speech, they're against it. Okay? Which makes perfect sense for them. And there's more issues than that. I bet you think that the left is against racial segregation. Would it surprise you to know that the University of Connecticut, in the not very Republican state of Connecticut, recently decided to build an all-black dormitory because they concluded that what prevents black kids from succeeding at college is having pesky white kids around. So they're segregating the University of Connecticut. Harvard already has a separate graduation ceremony just for black students. Okay? I thought they were against segregation, but it turns out they're not. They're against segregation when someone else is doing it. They're not against segregation when they're doing it. I bet you think the left is anti-war. Not so. It depends whose ox is getting gored. This is one of the more obscure tidbits from history that I will share with you today. But did you know that there was a year and a half when the left, the progressives, the communists, the socialists in both the United States and Britain were pro-Hitler? They were pro-Hitler for a year and a half, from September 1st, 1939, till June 20th, 1941. Okay? And there was a huge anti-war movement in the United States that stressing how important it was that the United States not get involved in World War II. Why? Because they were pro-Hitler. And in Britain, which actually was at war at this point, there was an anti-war movement in Britain up until June 20th, 1941, that was against Britain's war effort while they were fighting. And it was the left, because they were why were they pro-Hitler? Because Hitler signed a pact with Stalin. And if Stalin's on the side of Hitler, then the left is on the side of Hitler. And then Hitler attacked Stalin, and they turned on a dime, and now they were against Hitler, which is why World War II, everyone thinks back of World War II as the one war that everyone agreed on. Okay, there was no anti-war movement. We were all united in World War. But the reason we were united is that the normal Americans were united in the war effort because we were attacked, and because the Nazis and the Japanese were really, really bad. Okay, the left was united because we were on the same side as Stalin. That's all that mattered. We were fighting alongside Stalin, and that's what brought the left on board, which was why there was no controversy. There is no issue whatsoever on which you will find any permanent principle of the left. Okay? It's a movement about power. Whatever gets them power is what they're going to be in favor of. A couple of years ago, my home state senator, Elizabeth Warren, you may have heard of her, gave a speech in which she outlined the 11 commandments of progressivism. And it was a big hit, by the way. If you Google this, you'll find 100,000 fawning newspaper articles about it in every paper in the country. Like, oh my gosh, Elizabeth Warren's given us the 11 commandments of progressivism. And obviously this is based on the 10 commandments, but there's a fascinating distinction that goes on here, because the 10 commandments are, by their very definition, principles. These are permanent principles. You know, thou shalt not murder applies all the time to everybody in every circumstance. Like, sometimes it's okay to murder, and sometimes it's not. It's a universal principle. Not stealing, not committing adultery. Okay, this is not a situational thing. By its very definition, they're principles. But Elizabeth Warren's principles, her 11 principles, don't have any principles in them. None of them. I swear to you, one of them is we have to overturn the Hobby Lobby decision. That's one of her 11 commandments. Okay? She says that fast food workers get paid too little, and Wall Street needs to be regulated more. Well, those aren't principles. That's just who you like and who you don't like. That would be like saying, you know, my principle, is the Boston Red Sox should win more. You know, that's not a principle. 3 strikes and you're out is a principle. Okay, what team you like is not a principle. So this is very important to understand because it's the essence of what we're fighting against. They're completely mercurial. It's about getting power. They'll quote scripture if it helps them get power. They will be complete atheists if it helps them get power. They're not more to anything. There's a great deal of flexibility. And that's the first thing I want you to understand about the left. The second thing I want you to understand about the left is that they, and it's related, is that they hate, they despise history. Because to them, history is a bunch of bad people who were doing bad things until they came along. Okay, and they're bringing us into goodness. And then the whole nature, if you understand the progressive movement, is that you constantly have to reject even the progressives of the past because they're never as progressive as you are. Okay, and again, you'll see why this goes along with being completely unprincipled, because the principles inevitably come from the past. If you're a conservative, you look at the 10 Commandments and say, these are the great principles that have been the moral guideposts to our entire civilization for thousands of years, and the left says thousands of years. Okay, I bet they don't even believe in transgender bathroom rights. Okay, clearly this is a completely deficient document. We need to get rid of it. Okay, the Bill of Rights. My teachers, and I learned a lot from going to some of the most left-wing schools in some of the most left-wing communities in America. I was taught the Bill of Rights was a bunch of dead white European males. Wrote the Bill of Rights. What do you need that for? Okay, that's some dated document. We need new rights that the progressives are going to figure out what our new rights are. So if we're going to win this, we need to rededicate ourselves to being the side of rock solid principles that never, ever change. Lots of things, and I'm an economist basically by training, and economics is all about change. Things never stay still for 2 seconds in economics, and it's good. We want to have new innovations, and we figure out how to make things work better and better over time, and that's great. But the principles don't change, and I wanted to illustrate a couple of them in the time I have. One is indeed freedom of speech, and I want to tell you, freedom of speech is under attack more than it's ever been in any of our lifetimes and long before that. Do you realize the United States is pretty much the only country left in the world that has freedom of speech in any meaningful way at all? There used to be lots of them. Okay, it's down to just us. Britain used to have freedom of speech. Okay, and then they decided they needed hate crimes laws. Okay, and I have a bunch of liberal friends who say, well, hate crimes are really nasty and that's terrible. We can't have our hate speech. We can't have people, saying hateful things. But you understand what this means? In most of the Western European countries, in France, in Britain, in Germany, in Sweden, the government has an immigration policy that says we want to bring in millions and millions and millions of immigrants from the Middle East and Africa. They can all come in here, as many as they want, and that's our policy. And if you don't agree with that policy, well, that's hate speech. The British government arrests, on average, 9 people a day for what they posted on Facebook, for having the wrong opinion about immigration policy on Facebook, and you go to jail. Meanwhile, London is having the biggest crime wave it's ever had, largely because of the immigrants. Okay, and they passed New York City in murder and robberies and everything else, and the police aren't focusing on that. They're focusing on people who post the wrong thing on Facebook. That's who needs to go to jail. The murder's going unsolved. Okay, in Canada, You can go to jail for having the wrong opinion about transgendered people. If you say that guy over there in a dress, that's not a woman, that's a guy in a dress. Okay? Well, you're going to jail in Canada. They lock you up for saying that's a crime. 2 years is the penalty for not having the correct opinion about transgendered issues. And I wanted to wedge a point in there. Part of the unprincipled nature of the left is if the left is your friend at a particular period of time, that doesn't count for anything, because they'll toss you under the bus in 2 seconds the minute they find something they like better. And a case in point would be Sweden, which until very recently had a reputation of being the most feminist country on earth. Sweden was like the epicenter of feminism. They have a law in Sweden that half the cabinet has to be female. Okay? Has to be. It doesn't matter if you can, whether you find qualified people or not. They must be female. They are just dripping, up until just a couple of years ago, just dripping feminism. And then the Muslim immigrants came along. And now Sweden is the rape capital of Europe. They have the highest per capita rapes on the entire continent, and virtually all the rapes are committed by Muslim immigrants. I mean, virtually over 90%. Okay? It's completely an imported wave of rapists, but you can't complain about that, because women were all very well and good, but we like the Muslims more. Okay? Sorry, women, you've been replaced. Okay? Our new darling is the Islamic immigrants. So tough luck. You're going to have to suck it up. In Britain, they had this child rape scandal that went on for years and years and years, where like young girls, like 11, 12 years old, were being raped, tortured, drugged, and prostituted by gangs of Islamic immigrants. And the police, what's that, Tommy Robinson? That's right. He's out. I'm happy to report. And he was basically in jail for free speech. Okay, and the police were afraid to do anything about it because they'd be accused of being racist. This is where we're going to. And in the United States, we've lost it on the college campuses. Kids are being thrown out of college. Their academic careers are being ruined. Every single solitary Democrat in the United States Senate voted for a change in the First Amendment, which would allow Congress to regulate political speech. This was just a couple of years ago. This was 2014. Every Democrat went along with that. People say, well, Joe Manchin in Kentucky, and Tester in Montana, they're kind of moderate Democrats. Yeah, they all voted to get rid of the First Amendment. Every single one of them, to allow Congress to regulate free speech, political speech. So Congress would be able to make laws regulating who can say what about Congress. You don't see any downside to that, do you? That Congress can make laws on who gets to criticize Congress? Okay? That's what they're trying to do. The left in this country does not give a fig about free speech. It is under attack every day, and if we're not vigilant about this, we're going to lose everything. Because if you don't have the free speech, you particularly in political areas, obviously, you don't have a republic at all. And as far as history goes, I was trying to explain why I'm against the levels of immigration that our country has today, and why, even though I'm the grandson of immigrants, my grandparents came here in the early 20th century along with another huge wave of immigrants. And I was trying, I don't want to be a hypocrite, and I know there's a difference, and I think I finally grasped it. And there are two things which put immigration today in an entirely different place, and you have to understand the history to appreciate this. And the first one is we weren't a welfare state back then. Okay? It's when my grandparents showed up in this country, you got off the boat and you got a job right now. Today. If you don't get a job today, you don't eat today. Okay? Because that was it. There was no welfare at all, none. You worked and that wasn't even an option. Okay? 85% of Islamic immigrants into Europe, 85% are still unemployed 5 years later. Okay? My grandparents would have starved to death way before that. Okay? So what I think we should say to the progressives is you can have a welfare state or you can have immigration, pick one. Okay? You can't have both. Because you can never tell who's coming here because they want to be American versus who's coming here to get free money. You know, the welfare that we hand out is way above the average, income for most of the world. What a deal. Who wouldn't want that? You come here, you get free money. Okay? So that's the first problem. The second problem, and this is harder to quantify, and yet it's absolutely true. And I finally realized the salient point for me in my personal family life. My grandparents came from the Ukraine. And by the way, I never met them. They died before I was born. But they spoke Ukrainian and probably Russian in some combination. They're similar languages. And they probably spoke Yiddish. And my parents, their children, never spoke any of those languages. Okay? I grew up with my parents for years. They never spoke any of those languages. They never learned the languages of their own parents. Well, why was that? Because at the time, typical for most immigrants, their parents, the immigrants, understood that where they came from sucked. And where they were coming to, the United States of America, was the greatest country ever in the history of the world. And they had zero interest in hanging on to the vestiges of where they were coming from. That is not what the kids were learning. It was typical for immigrants in that era to tell their kids, we only speak English at home. You are not speaking Russian, even though that's my native language, because we're not going back there. That's gone. We want to get rid of it. Okay? If anything, they were embarrassed by it. They wanted to learn English and get their kids as Americanized as possible. They did not go to rallies celebrating the country they came from. They did not wave flags of the country they came from. They wanted to block it out of their memory as much as they could. They were waving American flags and going to American rallies, and that's the difference. They came here because they loved America. And in a society, if we're going to have that kind of immigration, again, we have to love ourselves in a way that we, as a country, the way we haven't in a long time, and we have to limit ourselves to immigrants who feel that way about our country. And I think those are two things that we need to do if we're going to change the direction. I'm going to take my last minute here and just tell you really quickly about the books I write. Because I've been speaking for years and years and years, and a long time ago, my friends said, you should write a book. And I did, and it was like the wrong book. Everybody thought I was going to write a 500-page tome about economics, but I had an epiphany that people don't read 500-page tomes about economics. If you write something that's fun and funny and accessible, you'll reach millions of people who will never read the economics book. So my first book was called The New Democrat. It's a parody history of the Obama years done as the Cat in the Hat, which I'm guessing most of you guys have read The Cat in the Hat. It's like Cat shows up uninvited at this middle-class American home. What's he do when he gets inside? He wrecks the place. He wrecks everything. And I was thinking, it's just like Obama, And the fascinating thing to me is his personality. He never gets it. To the last page of the book, the cat never understands what's obvious to everybody else, and that is that he is the problem. I'm thinking, it's Obama. That's exactly his personality. Can you imagine the man ever coming to suspect that he's the problem? Like in a million years, the thought would never cross his mind. And then he's got these two little friends, Thing 1 and Thing 2. Do you remember? They became Pelosi and Reed. And I realized I was writing the first complete history of the Obama years, all done as the Cat in the Hat. It goes through bailouts, stimuluses, death battles, everything you remember from 8 fun-filled Obama years, all done as the Cat in the Hat. And I got my first book review. Salon.com said that this was the most twisted piece of conservative propaganda print matter out there. And I was touched. That's on the cover.
Endorsement right there.
And I was moved to write my second book. Who's read The Lorax by Dr. Seuss? It was a movie a couple years ago. Dr. Seuss was a huge leftist. lifelong member of the American Socialist Party, just like Cortez and Bernie Sanders and all those guys. And he fills his children's books with socialist lessons for your kids. And the Lorax was his environmentalist book. It's about an evil capitalist called the Onceler who cuts down trees and makes consumer goods. And we are taught that that is bad, bad, bad. He drives the trees to extinction. He wipes them out, they go extinct, and his factory promptly goes out of business because there's no more trees. And I read this to my kids. I said, does that make sense to you? Do you think that capitalists destroy species that their business depends on? Do you think that Colonel Sanders is going to drive the chicken to extinction? Is anyone worried about that? That Colonel Sanders is going to throw every last chicken into the fryer and they'll be extinct and we'll never see another chicken again? I think it's exactly the opposite. I think Colonel Sanders cares more about the survival of the chicken species than anybody on the planet, including the chickens. He's got billions of dollars wrapped up in this. There are going to be more chickens as long as Colonel Sanders has anything to say about it. And I'll tell you something else. There are more chickens alive in the world today than ever before in history. You know why? Because we like to eat them. That's why. The greatest thing that ever happens to a species is that human beings like to eat you. This is like winning the species lottery, okay? Chickens, cows, wheat, corn, potatoes, you pick your species. We clear millions of acres just for you. We keep the predators away, we feed you. You get sick, we bring in doctors for you. What other species gets that? Now, in the end, we kill you and eat you. But that was going to happen anyhow. What do you think happens in the wild? Imagine you are a chicken living in the wild. How is your life going to end? You're going to move to Miami and get a condo on the beach? You're getting killed and eaten, and far more unpleasantly in the wild than an old McDonald's farm. So this was a book that very much needed to be parodied. Mine is called The Gorax because it stars Al Gore as the Lorax character, and it's about how America used to be free and prosperous because we were free, and then the environmentalist wackos came along and step by step, regulation by regulation, drove everybody out of business. And then finally, I will share with you my latest book. I want to do something about the election. It's called The Wizard of Iz. It's obviously a parody of The Wizard of Oz. And my first thought was that Bill Clinton made a really great wizard. Because as you'll recall, the original wizard is a fake. He's a charlatan. It's all smoke and mirrors. I thought Bill Clinton fit the role perfectly. When they first meet him in my book, they say, "Are you the Wizard of Iz?" He says, "It all depends on your definition of Iz." And Hillary is the Wicked Witch. And remember there was a cowardly lion in the book? I replaced him with a cowardly rhino. Who suspects the Democrats are wrong, but he's too scared to do anything about it. He's looking for the courage to actually do something useful when he gets to Washington. And it's a good story. I think it starts when Dorothy's house lands on Obama, and she finds herself in the land of the free lunchkins who have been living off the government for so long they've forgotten how to take care of themselves. Anyhow, they're kind of cool, unique books. I brought some with me if you'd like to check them out. They make nice Christmas gifts, for like conservative people. You happen to know any. And I guess I'm good. I thank you for the time. You want me to do anything else or take questions? Or... Thank you.
Nice. I like it. We were laughing over there. That was great stuff. Everybody. Mr. Loren Spivack, right? Spivack.
They are $2,400. You get all three.
Couple things that I was thinking about as he was speaking. Okay, just a couple things. Who all knows who Saul Alinsky is? Huh? You guys are in the state of Illinois, you got to, every one of you, right? What he was talking about, it rang clear as being an Alinskyite. He talked about the Clintons, right? He talked about Barack Hussein Obama. These are Alinskyites, studied under Alinsky. And one of the things he also mentioned as far as immigration overseas, it's happening here. How many people know that President Barack Hussein Obama cut a deal with the Mexican government to allow Guatemalans, El Salvadorans, and what was the other one? To come right into our nation. A man that was supposed to be here tonight, or today, Raymond Herrera. All right, anybody know of Raymond Herrera? I know you do. He was out in Marietta, California, when you remember those white buses going across the nation, delivering illegal aliens all over the place? He was at the top of the hill with his Mustang saying, no, not here. And he, did you hear the last name, Herrera? He's an American, served in Vietnam. American, Mexican descent, but he does not want those illegals. That is part of the Zwolinski method. That is part of the communists, the Cloward and Piven, of overwhelming the system, right? That's what it's all about, and that's what they are doing. It's all, I say it on my radio broadcast time after time after time. What we as Americans have to understand is that it is all about communism. Communism. And not to mention, they aren't even allowed to be in this country. You guys know that? Years ago, right? And not to mention the Muslims. Sorry, I'm not politically correct. I'm not politically correct at all. But anybody that is worshiping a pedophile, that's why I think it was Thomas Jefferson that